All right, everyone. Welcome to the STOA, the final session of September's Philosopher-in-Residence series with Wai Tsang, the missing Weltanschauung, perennial wisdom for systems change. And again, this is a four-part interlinking series of presentations where Wai explains what the missing 21st century worldview or Weltanschauung looks like. And session one, we talked about how perennial wisdom returns. Session two was about system change and how we can do it. Session three was a wild one. It was about Wai's symmetry theory of life and intelligence. And today, everything's coming together, talking about spiritual experience, non-duality, and why it happens. And I'm super excited about this session. So how today's going to work is similar to the other sessions. I'm going to take in Wai in a moment. He's going to present for 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. So if you have questions anytime, pop them in the chat. I'll call on you. You can ask your question away. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that, and I'll read your question on your behalf. That being said, Wai, welcome back to the Stone, my friend. Take us home. Take us home.
Fantastic. Good to be back. So the last in this series is really, they're all interlocking. So really, it continues very much from the first one. If you're going to recover the perennial wisdom, and as we did in the first talk, explain how the scientific rational mind can now conceive that we are this, speck in the universe, but simultaneously the universe and God. What this talk will explain is basically another hugely ambitious talk. Is why do these states of being one with the universe or being one with God happen? So another hugely ambitious talk tonight. Okay, to go over the the first three. So it's going to tie everything up into one kind of really cohesive whole. So basically, you got this idea of non-duality, or at the heart of the perennial wisdom is the central truth that somehow God is inside us, but also somehow that we are God. Okay, that's the big secret, that there's this experience of being one of the universe or being one with God. And it's not illusion, it's basically to see things as they really are. Okay. So all through history and in contemporary times, there have been ways to access this state. Now what this talk is not going to be, it's not going to be, I've discovered a new way to access non-duality, give me all your money and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, what this talk is going to be, I'm going to go through the paths with a reputation at the heart of all world religion, and in the kind of classic texts. So we're not talking about kind of contemporary teachers or even the 19th century kind of mystics for more recent times. We're really talking about tried and tested paths. We're going to explain why and how they work and what is the common factor behind them. And we'll also talk about psychedelic drugs as well and show how it links up. So it's basically this idea that in our normal, what we call normal consciousness, which is not normal at all, is the kind of or what we call mundane consciousness. I mean, it's likened to being asleep. So Buddha means awakened one, or the other idea is that basically we are essentially in the underworld. So the Gnostics saw us as being essentially dead. Okay, so we are or in another metaphor analogy, we are living in a cave. We are prisoners trapped in some kind of unreality and somehow in a state of illusion. And somehow to escape this state of illusion is to see things as they really are, escape the cave, wake up, etc. Okay, so why does it happen? Okay, why does the state happen? Well, historically, these paths are really kind of divided into two main categorizations. Okay, go about. I'll show you the later diagrams. So basically, they've been divided into paths of contraction and paths of expansion. Now I'll explain what it means. Okay, so you can see this diagram. Well, this kind of explains it partly. Paths of contraction are your, Jesus going meditating 40 days a night in the desert, kind of like self-annihilation, world renunciation. It's the kind of sadhus in India doing the austerities, meditating in caves and stuff like that. It's basically, it's kind of like really essentially destroying yourself. It's basically Well, if you meditate 40 days and nights without food in desert, you're going to be very thin. You're literally contracting. Okay, so basically, somehow by doing that, you're going to see little glimpses of eternity, little glimpses of God and stuff, or maybe full enlightenment. And other means which we'll concentrate on, because we think this is more appropriate for the 21st century in a modern context, is paths of expansion. This includes things like Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism, Kabbalah, etc. And this involves basically going out into the world and expand. Well, we'll explain what it means, because we're going to in quite some detail. So the basic idea with paths of contraction and paths of expansion, there's a basic idea, and this idea basically you're trying to use a metaphor. You're trying to put out a candle flame. You can either let the candle burn out in a kind of controlled way, or you can snuff out the candle. So the paths of contraction are basically literally stamping out the flame, trying to suppress the flame, whereas your paths of expansion is trying to burn out the candle somehow, and then the flame goes out. The candle, the flame, is really the flames of passion. And in all the literature, there's this idea that there's the fundamentals of life are to do with pleasure and pain. Okay, this is basic psychology, but these are kind of fundamentals of the universe. It's really fear and desire. So all your kind of like what you're driven, your engines of your mind are really driven by fear and desire, pleasure and pain. These are really the fundamentals of existence, and they're really like metaphysical fundamentals. We'll talk about pleasure and pain, good and evil, at the end of the talk, because it's really important for understanding these paths of contraction, paths of expansion. Now, Joseph Campbell had a very good, from his readings, from his studies, a very good way of describing it in his Power of Myth series of interviews with Bill Moyers. Actually, funny, Jordan Peterson has used this a lot in recent interviews, I've noticed. It is the idea that basically heaven is guarded by two angels, and the two angels, they both hold swords. One angel represents fear, and the other angel represents desire. So you try to enter the gates of heaven, and you have fear and desire. You're going to be cut down. You won't get in, like bouncers, stopping you from getting into the club. So this is the idea that if you can still your fear and your desire, obviously it's not easy, because we're driven by fear and desire. We're driven by pleasure and pain. Somehow, if you can overcome your fear and desire, transcend these normal engines that make us tick, then somehow you shall experience this peace that passeth all understanding. You shall basically cross over into transcendence. So what does it mean? What does it mean? We're going to basically go into paths of contraction quite quickly, because we're going to concentrate on paths of expansion, because we think that's where the action's really going on. So yeah, paths of contraction, kind of the ascetic, we think it's not appropriate for modern times, because basically modern people are basically so value added. There's too much to contract. And I think in maybe more primitive times, to go off and meditate in a cave, there's less to contract. We're so educated, we're so, worldly, we have so much value add, that it's very hard to renounce the world now. It's very hard to go off and try to, suppress all those talents, that learning that you have of the world and the universe by just, by somehow ignoring the world. I think it's really impossible for 21st century person living in modern industrialized society. So, these are the classic, what people see as a mystical path, go off to meditate in a cave. Well, in modern times, this is very hard to do, to find a cave in London to meditate in. And you really can't escape the system. Even the taxman will get you. I mean, basically, you can't leave the system. If you have family, you have friends, it's very hard to renounce the world in the modern setting. So we think the paths of contraction are not really appropriate, and plus the fact that if you're going to starve yourself for 40 days and nights, now this is called breatharianism. It's called living on air. It's actually a meditation practice that's still done, that's still known about in Tibet. Okay, if you do that, you're basically bring yourself close to death, and you're going to damage your health probably for the rest of your life. You're not going to, you're going to basically damage yourself. So we think paths of contraction are something to do with the past, not really to do with today. Now, look, I'm going to go into psychedelic drugs quickly, okay, because I'm going to show that they are really a form of path of contraction, okay, and I'll show why, okay. So I'm going to show that basically psychedelic drugs are really basically suppressing your fear and desire in a rather direct way, and I'll go through this quite quickly, because it's I think it's important, because I think many people I know, and also myself, are basically come into this journey through psychedelic drugs in a sense where Padmasambhava, where lotus born. In effect, Odysseus, the first port of call, is the land of lotus eaters. So lotus is a psychedelic drug. So like many people, the initiation is through psychedelics. So we're going to cover psychedelic drugs quite quickly, okay, to just get it out of the way. Okay, so look, this diagram just represents all those, you see I'm shaking my cursor on the right-hand side. These are kind of all the kind of substances which historically have had a real kind of reputation in the holy texts, like Bhagavad Gita. We mentioned lotus eaters, fly agaric mushroom in historical shamanism for really delivering the goods, and hashish used by Sufis and the Hashashin sect in Islam, etc. Now we're going to show basically all these different substances, even though on the left-hand side of the diagram, they hit predominantly different chemical pathways: serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, cannabinoid receptors, acetylcholine, gamma-aminobutyric acid. There's a common kind of factor which they're all working on, basically. So we're going to go through this quite quickly. Now serotonin, LSD, psilocybin, we could have included DMT in this. This is really the bread and butter of modern day kind of psychedelic initiation, LSD, really, I think, from my personal journeys in the land of psychedelia about 20, 30 years ago. Now, most of the research is concentrating on 5-HT2A receptor for the past 20, 30 years. We think the real action is going on with what's called 5-HT1A. Okay, now we'll explain why. It is because basically serotonin, 5-HT1A, but also dopamine D2, which the lotus plant, the active ingredient is apomorphine, hits the dopamine 2 receptor, and also cannabinoids. There's a common site of action. And basically what it is, they all bind onto what's called autoreceptors. Okay, so basically a 5-HT1A is what's called an autoreceptor. And let me explain. Okay, so here we have these chemical pathways in the brain. You have axons, then you have like the synapse. Okay, the synapse releases chemical into the synaptic cleft, and that modulates your brain. Now, these pathways are really distributed all over your brain, but they're really highly concentrated in emotion centers. Now, what the autoreceptors do, they provide negative feedback. They exist on the presynaptic bouton of the synapse, or of the axon, basically. So they provide a negative feedback signal that shuts down the flow of serotonin or dopamine or the cannabinoid affects all many systems. This is how cannabinoids actually work. They all work through influencing the autoreceptors of different chemical pathways. Okay. And with respect to mescaline, norepinephrine, okay, this is slightly more complex because norepinephrine does bind onto norepinephrine receptors very strongly, but this is where I think mainstream research gets it right. Even though the binding affinities is very strong with 5-HT2C, they also bind onto 5-HT2A, where all the concentrated research is focusing on in terms of psychedelic effects. But in terms of non-duality, we think it's really 5-HT1A, that autoreceptor shutting down effect. That's really where the action is going on. Okay, so mescaline is really also influencing really serotonin receptors, even though it binds onto strongly norepinephrine receptors. And this is actually kind of widely believed by many researchers. Now, if we go on to talk about acetylcholine, acetylcholine is important because all the witches' weeds, which are basically in the mystery religions, the use of these agents, i.e., belladonna, henbane, mandrake, datura, it's in the Bible, it's in witchcraft all through Europe, through magic. Basically, what they do is they basically all affect acetylcholine receptors. But again, they basically shut things down. They all antagonize the action of these acetylcholine receptors. And these acetylcholine receptors are very heavily represented in the emotion centers. Now, okay, just finish off this quick summation. Now, the fly agaric mushroom, okay, this is the workhorse of shamanism in Siberia, in the Manchuria, where the word shaman comes from. This is like the standard kind of substance that's used. Okay, now this is kind of slightly confusing because the acetylcholine receptor, which the witches' weeds work on, it's called muscarinic. It's actually named after fly Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom. But the thing is, the fly agaric mushroom doesn't exert its action on the acetylcholine muscarinic receptor, which is named after the fly agaric. It actually affects what's called a muscimol receptor. And if you took enough fly agaric to get a psychedelic effect off your muscarine receptors, you're basically dead many times over, basically. So it's poisonous. It stops your heart beating. Now, the thing about muscimol is basically gamma aminobutyric acid, which is the main inhibitory transmitter in your brain. But what muscimol is doing, it's really jamming itself into the gamma aminobutyric acid receptor, and it's basically forcing the inhibition to really kind of just blanket inhibition, the target sites. Now, benzodiazepines, tranquilizers, alcohol, barbiturates also affect the gamma aminobutyric acid receptor, but they do so in a modulatory way, on a kind of like to kind of to turn up the volume slightly, whereas the muscimol molecule is actually jamming itself into actual gamma aminobutyric acid binding sites. So it was a far stronger signal. To cut a long story short, what the common factor is basically you're shutting things down. You're basically stopping things from normally working. When you understand these muscimol receptors, acetylcholine receptors, serotonin, dopamine, etc., is basically very heavily concentrated in these emotion centers. Do you see? You're literally using a chemical substance. You're literally contracting. You're shutting down those pathways. So in effect, psychedelics, you see, is in effect a path of contraction, but it's actually doing the same thing that you might get from a near-death experience or kind of meditating 40 days and nights in the desert. Okay, so we kind of got paths of contraction out of the way. We're going to just basically move on to paths of expansion, because we think this is where the action is really going on. We think this is what is most interesting about these pathways. Okay, so the next diagram, we're going to show basically that all these different seemingly different methods from different places, different texts, different traditions, they're all really saying the same thing. They're all really, there's an equivalence between a tantrika practicing tantra, a Kabbalah adept, a Renaissance Magus, a mythic quest hero. They're really talking about the same thing. It's really the same path. So we want to show that there is a common denominator, there's a common factor, which shows that really they are literally talking about the same thing. Now, okay, some of this is obvious. Okay, Vajrayana Buddhism, the so-called diamond vehicle, came from India. So it's essentially left-hand tantra that's been imported to India about 1,000 years ago by Padmasambhava, lotus born, which implies it's kind of psychedelic use. Okay. Yoga in the traditional meaning of the word, meaning to yoke, to somehow union with God in the traditional sense, it really was, these practices really were to do with the meaning of the Vedas. Somehow you can unite with God somehow. Now the mythic quest hero, now, okay, Joseph Campbell is quite very eloquent when he says that basically, yes, there is these historical, maybe semi-historical characters who appeared all over the world. They attained this mystic state. He thinks that's the central experience, the central idea behind the mythic quest hero and the journey, the mythic quest journey, the state of basically transcendence, apotheosis, the grail, the finding the princess. And it's a mystical state of experiencing yourself as a circle whose center is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. It's like saying experiencing yourself as the all in the all, i.e., non-duality. Okay. So also in the oration on the dignity of man, okay, so the Renaissance luminaries also thought the same thing, because in the oration on dignity of man, Pico de Mirandura writes that the wanderings of Ulysses, the myth of Ulysses, is essentially magic. It's essentially, Kabbalah encoded in basically a kind of parable, in kind of like a allegoric language. So the idea of a mythic quest hero as the mystic path is really something which most Joseph Campbell fans will notice, but is not widely kind of recognized. But you see that it is an idea which has been out there for a long time. Now the Kabbalah and the Corpus Hermeticum. Now the Corpus Hermeticum is this really important text that appeared during the Renaissance. Okay, that was supposed to contain the mystical wisdom of Egypt. And it's totally plausible because it corresponds with papyrus fragments, with the Book of the Dead, which was kind of written in stone in the Temple of Luxor, that really the Corpus Hermeticum contained the Prisca Theologia, the original religion of Egypt. Now, this is important because the Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, really, it's been long thought that there should be a connection between Corpus Hermeticum and Kabbalah for the simple reason there's a common factor, which is ancient Egypt. because Kabbalah is the hidden teachings of Moses. And Moses was an Egyptian prince. Now, the rabbinical traditions hold that he basically learned all the kind of wisdom of Egypt, the kind of mathematical, scientific, the mystical. He basically was a very smart guy, man of his caliber, would have really known the kind of like stuff of the corpus meticum. So the fact that there are these parallels between what's described in the corpus meticum and the Kabbalah shouldn't surprise us. But what we will show is basically all these 5 paths, they're really the same path. And really, this is what is extrapolatable to the 21st century. Okay, so now in this diagram, we're going to explain it. Okay, in terms of paths of expansion, it's basically, okay, just stop the screen share for short. Now, in terms of paths of expansion, there's basically kind of 3 major aspects to our lives. And it's basically, it is head, heart, and hand. It's basically, it is the things we think, is the things we feel emotionally, and is the things we do. So Bhagavad Gita talks about 3 paths, the path of action, karma marg, the path of devotion, bhakti marg, and the path of knowledge, gnana marg, which is also called sankhya in a separate chapter. And this is the path of knowledge or analytical reasoning. Now, in terms of the mythology, one of the tellings of the Grail myths, okay, there's many all through Europe of the Knights of the Grail. Now, one of the tellings, 3 knights find the Grail. They are Beaufort, Galahad, and Percival. So Beaufort is the thinking knight, Galahad is the knight of action, and Percival is the knight pure of heart. See, it's the same idea. And in Corpus Meticum, to know and to act and to feel and to hope is the straight way, the divine way, proper to the good. Again, head, heart, and hand. What we think, what we feel, what we do is somehow related to this path of expansion. So essentially, these are the 3 dimensions of what we are and what we do, basically. And you can talk about Buddha's 8-fold path. That really, is right living, right thinking, right feeling, right, right metaphysics, whatever. Get everything right, and basically you will get closer to enlightenment. It's like, tick the 8 boxes on your coffee shop loyalty card, and you get a free coffee. It's like that. So basically, but those 8 aspects again are to do with thinking, to do with feeling, to do with acting. If you act and feel and think in a certain way, then the idea is basically you set the conditions for this state of non-duality, or at the very least, you can lead a better life. Now, this leads to the idea of what's called, to really understand the path of expansion, leads to the idea of the resultant path and the causal path. Now, this is from Tibetan Tantra or Tibetan Vajrayana, and also from Indian tantric practices, but it extrapolates to the rest of the things we just described. Now, it's basically this. It's the idea that the resultant path, basically, what the result is. You have been told, or you've been initiated to the idea that you are God. Okay, so that's the resultant path. Whereas the causal path, you don't know what it is, but you are taught ethics. You're taught to think in a certain way. You're taught to act in a certain way, feel in a certain way. So essentially, like you might call it the light side, the Jedi way. These kind of recur again and again in world religion. Try to be forgiving, try to be loving, try to be compassionate, try to be merciful. In the same way, in the political talk, the second version, the second part, we talked about the perennial wisdom and political philosophy. The perennial wisdom and the metaphysical and cosmological assumptions of the perennial wisdom also lead to personal ethics. And in a sense, what it means is that basically, even though you don't know that you're God or all is one, or there's a teleological universe, you're basically acting as if that were the case. So you're taught to love everyone else as though they were yourself, and treat everyone equally, because on a certain metaphysical level that you are one soul and one consciousness. Okay, you're not told that, but basically that's the underpinning of essentially not just the ethics and the moral of the causal path, but essentially moral and ethics in general from the perennial wisdom. So I'm making a very generalizing statement, but I think it's true, because when we recognize this perennial wisdom has occurred again and again all through history. The people who founded civilizations, the Yellow Emperor who founded Chinese civilization, Quetzalcoatl, all the kind of prophets, Joseph Campbell includes Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad in his analysis. You realize that there's a common set of teachings and it all overlap. Anyway, these teachings form the basis of your causal path, where you're basically acting in a kind of, in a kind of like ethical, moral way according to the teachings of the prophets, and you have some hope there might be some, reward at the end of it. You don't know exactly what it is. Now the resultant path, you're told what it is. You're basically told to act in a certain way, bhakti marg, gnana marg, think and feel in a certain way for that prize. Okay, so we're going to go through the stages of these paths now. So what it means is that okay, so how do you know? So how do you know that that you are God? You know because you are initiated. Okay, you or maybe you grown up in a society like some parts of India, it's commonly accepted. Or maybe your dad is a kind of Kabbalah rabbi, and you've basically been initiated at quite well. I mean, there's a rule that you can't be initiated unless you're 40 years old. But anyway, you grew up in a context where basically the initiation is part of your growing up, or your parents have joined some sect or some religious movement, new religious movement, where it's part of the belief system. Now, in ancient times, okay, the initiation also involved psychedelic use. So it's ritualized psychedelic use. You weren't just told you were God, you were given a little glimpse of eternity. Okay. We think in modern times, this idea of restoring the mysteries of Eleusis is quite a hot topic right now. We've got people, yeah, like even Sam Harris, people like Jordan Peterson, people like, obviously you're kind of like 60s, 70s hippies and your New Age people, but also Brian Marescu's book, Immortality Key, was all about, kind of like this idea that the Christian Eucharist was essentially a psychedelic sacrament. And that was on a New York Times bestseller list for weeks and weeks last year. So it's really an idea that's really coming back in vogue. We think that kind of like a systematic initiation through a new worldview, which can scientifically explain that non-duality, or somehow that we are one, that we are essentially God and the universe simultaneously, and a human being, coupled with a resurrection of a 21st century version of the Eleusinian mysteries, is probably something to aim for. Now what's happened in the 60s and 70s especially, and actually there's a psychedelic renaissance, is people are getting the initiation by accident. The people are stumbling across it in trance parties, and basically people have this going through their normal lives. They might even be, even skeptical secular humanists. Then suddenly, road to Damascus, wow, I experienced myself being one of the universe. So they've been initiated, but then they're now looking for basically a way to integrate that experience, that initiation, into something productive. So okay, so this is what leads us to stage 2. So you've been initiated, you've been told you are God. Funny, in the past over the past 20 years, through my website iWay, which I don't get much traffic now because I haven't worked on it for many years. I've not written new material. But we received 2 emails, one from Saudi Arabia and one from Sudan. Okay, I don't want to give any more information than that, because they wrote these Sufis wrote to me saying, my Sufi master told me I am God and I've been initiated, and my Sufi master told me not to tell anyone, but your website has everyone as God splattered all over it, so I thought it was okay to write to you. So this initiation is still going on, even in like Wahhabi kind of fundamentalist countries like Saudi Arabia. So this historically this has always gone on, but for the 21st century, we think we need to basically revive not just the idea, we need to revive the entire worldview and metaphysical and cosmological assumptions, but also reconcile themselves with science, because we can't really contract our knowledge of science. We can't really get rid of that. We can't contract our knowledge of technology and what's happening in the world. So anyway, the way ahead is really to explain these kind of like mystical ideas through science. And once you have the initiation, then basically that knowledge will keep you there, which leads us to the second part of these paths, which is, okay, going back to the Kabbalah, these kind of formal paths, Tantra, Vajrayana. After you're initiated, okay, the practice involves reaffirmation. So reaffirmation, you've been told you're God. Okay, but the truth is so verified, it's very easy to forget. Okay, so basically you have to keep on reaffirming that truth. So this is called sadhana in the tantras. It's basically these spiritual practices involve myriad ways by which you remind yourself in a formal setting, in an ashram or whatever, that you are God. Okay. Yeah, just skip over this quickly. In the same way you had this kind of pyramid of, kind of you are God. Maslow's hierarchy. This has been in tens of thousands of psychology textbooks and self-help books, basically. It's less known that Maslow, towards the end of his life, he added another kind of point on his pyramid. He actually added self-transcendence. So basically added something mystical towards the end of his life. He died in 1970. Might have been the case. 1970 might have taken a whole load of LSD and realized, oh my God, there is this kind of transcendence thing. Anyway, it means that basically Maslow's hierarchy and the kind of like the causal path and the resultant path pyramid we saw earlier, you can really merge the two together into one pyramid, really, I believe. Okay, so when you take into account that Maslow included this transcendent mystical aspect towards the end of his life. Okay, so okay, this is the goddess of the void used in Tibetan Buddhism. It's basically to one of the kind of sadhanas to reaffirm that you're God. So basically you imagine in the goddess of the void basically a manifestation of God, and then you keep reminding yourself that you are that. So this is a reaffirmation, and your meditation is basically constantly kind of reaffirming that truth. And so in India, one of the meditations in Tantra is Shivoham, Shivoham, Shivoham. Repeat that all day for many hours. And it just means I am Shiva, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. So that's a very crude way of doing it. But these are reaffirmations. And reaffirmations involving yantras, mantras, kind of maybe having another peak, having another dose of you get the picture. You just want to reaffirm the truth. And into the goddess of the void, you project the goddess, you project a manifestation of God. Even though God, it can't be put into words, you can't describe God, you can only experience God. You have a meditation focus of an aspect of God. So a very popular one is Avalokiteshvara or Guan Yin, and that's a kind of goddess of, or the God aspect of compassion and love. So that's a very popular one. But other ones, other kind of like Buddhist or deities you might imagine is Tara, more to do with knowledge and wisdom. So again, in India, your meditation focus will be Shiva, Shivoham, Shivoham, Shivoham. But because we've seen the equivalence between the mythic quest hero, the tantric adept, and the magus, essentially you can stick in, and I'm not being facetious, you can literally stick in the hero with 1,000 faces, the mythic quest hero, because it's the same character, it's the same journey, okay? And now what I think is most appropriate for the 21st century is basically this idea of the, I had a Vitruvian man, but it doesn't seem to be there anymore. Okay, Vitruvian man is for some, is a different, anyway, there's a diagram of basically the Leonardo's Vitruvian man, which is basically symbolizing the kind of unity between a person and heaven, essentially, a microcosm as macrocosm. So I think for the 21st century, what's really appropriate is really yes, it is an amalgam of all these separate characters: mythic quest hero, tantric adept, the Kabbalah adept, etc. But I think because we are living in a world which was, especially in Europe, especially in America, the idea that basically we're living in a world created by ideas of a Renaissance Magus, ideas of the corpus mysticum. We think that basically the notion of basically living out the idea of God as Renaissance Magus is really most appropriate for the 21st century in modern industrialized societies. And it's because, okay, the Corpus Mysticum is a great book, and it's very detailed, and it's very, very, I think, very, one of the greatest distillations of mystical knowledge in a very short format. Type Corpus Mysticum PDF, you get a copy instantaneously. You don't have to be like the Medici sends scouts out into all Europe, and they found one in a Bulgarian monastery, this greatest book about the true religion. Anyway, let's dwell on the Corpus Mysticum, because what's telling you, okay, specific passages. It's telling you, okay, this is Tantra, one of the passages in chapter 10. It's exhorting you to equal yourself to God. Again, it's just a straightforward tantra. Equal yourself to God, for the like is intelligible by the like. Okay, but then it's telling you to basically the specific passage about what does it take to reunite with God in the first chapter. It's basically saying, you give yourself to the powers, becoming powers. You are with the Father. You're in God. it's telling you basically to acquire power in this world, but not for selfish ends. Okay, it's telling you in chapter 10 to really excel, to leap beyond everybody. It's telling you to believe in yourself, that nothing is impossible. It's telling you that you can understand every art, every science, and manner and custom of every living thing. When you kind of meditate on those passages, then you absolutely understand that this was really the secret of the Renaissance men, because this is exactly what they did. They took it upon themselves to understand every science, every art and manner and custom of every living thing. And this idea basically, now it's important that when we talk about power and acquiring power, we're entering into the dark side, okay, because we're entering into this idea that in the tantras especially, and Vajrayana basically, okay, some of you are wondering, okay, where's the sex? You said tantra, where's the sex? Isn't it about sexual energy, isn't it? I mean, no. Tantra and Vajrayana, the tantras of India, it was about all energy. Okay, this is what it was originally about. It wasn't just about sexual energy, which is obviously very powerful, especially when you're a teenager in your early 20s. It was the idea that basically all energy, the energies of compassion, love, also ambition, also even anger, hatred, jealousy, can be transmuted for the mystical path. Now, this is obviously very dangerous because these are dark energies. So we need to explain, okay, what is the meaning of good and evil? We need to explain what it is. It is because we are saying basically that this path of Tantra, the mythic quest hero of the Magus, it is essentially, basically having the knowledge that you are God, that you are eternal, that you can basically do the impossible, learn every art, every science. But the trick, the difficulty is telling you, you have to go into the world and manifest it. And the Corpus Hermeticum actually warns, okay, this knowledge, this piety will oftentimes get you murdered, okay? And the tantras, a tantrika doing this practice, going into the world as God, you're called a hero, because you're going to be experiencing lots of trouble if you do this. Which also leads to this idea in Islam of taqiyya. You have to basically be more discreet and maybe a little bit more subtle. So you're trying to navigate this path of basically you know you're God, and you're trying to manifest divinity on this planet. Okay, obviously the Renaissance men had to keep it secret because heresy laws were very strict at that time. And if you declared yourself, I am God, you're going to be executed, basically, simple as that. Okay. So this is the hard part. Okay, so this is the hard part of basically you're entering into the world. You know you're God, and you have these energies. You have these energies of lust, of ambition, anger. These are basically. I mean, you're God, but you still have to eat. You still have to go to the toilet. You still have homeostatic needs. You still have to satisfy Maslow's hierarchies. So what does it mean? Okay, what does it mean to basically you are kind of like you're basically you're entering into the left hand. You're basically playing with these energies, which might be called evil and dark, and you're somehow merging them with the spiritual world. Okay, we need to examine the nature of good and evil. Okay, we really need to. This is really important. Okay. What happened was basically with the Renaissance, there was, in the same way, there was a reappraisal of notions of a great chain of being and the divine right of kings to rule, which we talked about in the second talk, the political system change talk. There was also a appraisal of good and evil that emerged. Now, okay, it's not telling you to be evil. It's basically it's saying that basically there's something about evil which is a part of our makeup, as a part of our lives. We need to really explain and understand what it is. Okay. So let us do a screen share, just do a skimming stone over this diagram, because it kind of shows that what emerged. And okay, this diagram is basically, we start from the top, is like, as we go down, we go forwards in time. Okay, so we're going to go through like a skimming stone of what emerged. Okay, what emerged was basically this idea that God is both, is not a good man or a good male character, that this idea that somehow the divine, or there's a kind of metaphysical interplay between good and evil, that somehow is a cosmic battle between good and evil, that even though God is love, ultimately there's a kind of duality between good and evil, and it's fundamental to basically what's happening in the universe. Okay, we can go back to the Templars. Now the notion of Abraxas, God is good and evil, was basically is from ancient Egypt, and the Templars adopted Abraxas on their most kind of sacred seals. Okay, which then became incorporated into Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. William Blake, kind of took this idea of the marriage of heaven and hell. Now, what was he saying? He's saying that he says evil is the active springing from energy, and good is the passive that obeys reason. What does he mean by that? Okay, we're going to explain. And also, Herman Melville, right? Okay, another romantic, writes this book called Moby Dick. The main character is an anti-hero. He's called Captain Ahab. Now, Ahab was a wicked king, and basically his journey is a journey of vengeance to kill a whale, but somehow that involves his spiritual transcendence. And the Freemason kind of romantics had this idea of good and evil as somehow being intrinsic to life. Now, a lot of conspiracy theorists make a lot of this Luciferic, Freemasons are devil worshippers. No, they're saying that somehow good and evil are intrinsic to basically this human condition. Okay, and Friedrich Nietzsche later on, almost echoing the words of William Blake in the end of his book Beyond Good and Evil, he writes that the ancient curtain is torn, the people laugh, light and dark wedded are as one. Again, like this marriage of heaven and hell. Now, okay, going to more contemporary times, Carl Gustav Jung and Hermann Hesse were massively fans of Friedrich Nietzsche, and they both really promoted Abraxas. Hermann Hesse wrote a very influential book called Demian, which apparently is huge in Korea, in South Korea. That's why the band BTS has kind of Abraxas imagery in all their videos. Now, Carl Gustav Jung, in his Red Book, is essentially the last chapter is he goes full Gnostic, he goes full Abraxas in the last chapter. Now, the Red Book is the book which his estate banned the publishing of until 2006. So basically, it is Jung's real mission, and it was essentially to revive the Prisca theologia, the ancient Egyptian, essentially, religion of Abraxas for the 21st century. Now, going to the present. Now, Frank Herbert was a huge fan of Carl Gustav Jung, Joseph Campbell as well, and essentially George Lucas's Star Wars essentially derived from Dune. I mean, the Tatooine desert planet. Luke Skywalker's dad was a spice freighter pilot. Ben Kenobi told him, etc. It's basically derived from Dune, and also from Joseph Campbell, and also directly from Jung. Okay, so basically you see this kind of transmission of ideas. And many popular thinkers now, like Peter Jordison and George Lucas, popularizers, are basically really bringing back in vogue ideas of Carl Gustav Jung and also Joseph Campbell. What it means is essentially there's a kind of reassessment of the idea of good and evil. But what does it mean? Okay, it means basically if we talk about Tantra, and we're talking about playing with these kind of like these kind of really quite powerful energies, what does it mean? It means basically that essentially good and evil are fundamentals of reality, basically. And the idea that the human condition is a marriage of heaven and hell, and that basically we are living in this human condition. And somehow we must work through this kind of cosmic battle between heaven and hell, which then links up with existing ideas in world religion. Now these new ideas of good and evil really challenge the ideas of good and evil presented by the Catholic Church and the Church of England, which was really what Nietzsche called slave morality, which is essentially that God is good, and basically God is male, and that basically good is what we tell you to do, basically, and that there's original sin. If you basically obey the church, we will basically cure you of your original sin. We can basically sell you indulgences. You can buy your way into heaven, hell, purgatory, etc. So this new understanding is really, it wasn't new at all. It was actually the revival of ancient ideas. So Zoroastrianism, this idea of the cosmic battle between Ahriman and Ormazd. But the Zoroastrian texts are very specific when they describe this cosmic battle going on in the head of an individual. So in Islam, this is basically jihad means struggle. On a cosmic level, it's a struggle between Shaitan and God, basically. Shaitan is the one who rebels, Satan, essentially. And this jihad happens between societies, within a society. But Muhammad also says the most excellent jihad is perfection of character. Okay, so somehow this jihad is going on inside a person, this struggle between this inner shaitan and the person. So really, this idea of the struggle between good and evil is really timeless. It's Zoroastrianism. It is Abraxas. It's ancient Egyptian. It is people say that Christianity means it's a progression from a kind of vengeful God and kind of like a evil God to a God of light. But it is like Hinduism. There is God is destroyer and creator and sustainer, because in the book of Revelation, second coming of Christ, whether you believe it's a person or a movement, is essentially quite destructive. Okay, it's basically, I worked in a church for 10 years, a Church of England church for 10 years. And I never heard a single sermon about the book of Revelation. Now, the Pentecostal church pack them in with sermons about the book of Revelation and what's happening in current times. And the simple reason is because book of Revelation shows that the Christ, or the army of Christ, is opposing the kings and generals of this world. So obviously, Church of England, head of your church is a king or queen. You got to cut out the book of Revelation. Anyway, it means that basically this idea of God as both good and evil, it is not a revision. It's basically the return of the original idea of world religion, really. Now, what does it mean? Okay, what does it mean? Okay, this is what I think it means with respect to life and to the human condition. And I think William Blake is right when he says evil is the active springing from energy. What he's saying is basically, we have passions, we have basically energies, and they're basically part of the human makeup. Okay, so I'm running out of time. They're basically part of the human makeup, and basically they are part of being a part of the animal kingdom. So we have these kind of like, we have these selfish genes, myself, my family, my clan, my race, in that order. And also, the mathematics of kin selection is also the mathematics of genocide. This is part of the natural world. The idea that schizotypal sociopathic traits are selected for by nature. It just means that basically there is something about our makeup which is basically to do with this animal bestial nature. Okay, but when we are aware that there is this kind of holy divine nature, then we can choose between this kind of bestial nature and the divine nature. But at the same time, we can't suppress or deny that we have these energies. So we need morality to stop us from killing each other and doing genocide, but we still have these passions to reproduce, to basically even pursuit of power, pursuit of recognition. Essentially, what this idea of the idea of a cosmic battle between good and evil, coupled with this idea of a resultant path, is that basically you are using these energies with the knowledge and with the causal path, understanding in place of basic morals and basic ethics derived from this notion that everyone is God, coupled with the idea that your ultimate aim is to become one with God. And you're navigating those human energies and those human passions, and you're not denying them. You can't suppress them. You can't really, in the modern context, I don't think we can contract these energies. And basically the path of expansion is really to burn out these energies, but in such a way as to basically transmute those energies into spiritual development, which leads us to the dark side. The dark side means that basically you are empowered with knowledge that you are God, but you're also stuck in the ego. You're stuck in these basic tendencies, myself, my family, my clan, my race, and also genocide. So understanding, in the last talk, we talked about the second talk about the Nazi party. Where did it go wrong? It's basically the empowerment of this secret society, knowing these kind of corpus mescum ideas, creating this powerful movement. At the same time, forgetting the kind of like the religious, I guess, spiritual aspect, and basically wedding the power of knowing that you're God with these base instincts for things like genocide. And also, yes, you had some of the Enlightenment ideas with these kind of movements of a kind of universal brotherhood, but as a universal brotherhood, as long as you were German of the same race. Do you see? There's a kind of like when you have these base instincts coupled with this empowering knowledge of being divine, then that is called black magic, and it's very, very powerful. And really, I think really the history really is a kind of interplay between these forces of light and dark, these animal instincts, coupled with this kind of like desire, coupled with this kind of like almost like an attractor. It was like the future sends this experience into people's minds, the mythic quest hero, the tantric adept, the magus, in order to create these experiences, in order to generate ethics, morality, and political philosophy, in order to essentially to drive the process of cosmic evolution forwards. Okay, So essentially, the world history can be seen as a battle between good and evil. I'm not saying anything new here. That involves, okay, white magic, these founders of religion, these kind of like these spiritual teachers, these maguses, these Renaissance men, but also the dark side. And okay, I'm going to say something quite controversial, which I think it's quite obvious to most people, is that what happens with religion is basically the dark side of power, acquisitiveness, territoriality, of just basically wanting to express those animal instincts, basically become organized religion. So basically what happens with the teachings of the founders of religion, Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha, get taken over by the dark side. So really, coming to the end of the talk, linking up this knowledge with what I've just said about the dark side is something that's intrinsic to world politics and world history. Basically, there is a kind of interplay and really a battle between this dark side and the light side. And it's the reason why Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad, they all challenge the status quo. You see, when the perennial wisdom emerges historically and in present times, it's going to be opposed by the existing social order. So Jesus, obviously, everyone knows what happened to him. He got crucified. The incident in the temple courtyard with it wasn't money lenders, it was money changers. So what it was, okay, I'll tell you what it was. Basically, in Jesus's time, basically how the Jews paid their tax was basically you bought in your livestock, your grain, okay, the allotted amount of tax. And what happened was you changed that for a temple coin. So these are money changes. You basically registered a certain amount of grain or a certain amount of livestock. Then you had a temple coin. You took that temple coin up to the top of the temple. The Sadducees, the high priests of the temple, then looked at the coin. They dropped it. It made a certain noise, looked a certain way, sounded right, weighed the right. You paid your taxes. Okay, so it's basically the incident in the temple was a direct challenge to the system of taxation. When you do that, you are basically cutting at the very roots of political power. So there's this idea that Jesus was a rebel, Jesus as a revolutionary. And Buddha challenged the social order, said women can be enlightened. He was basically a warrior caste, really challenging the Brahmin caste. Now, John Hogue, who writes good esoteric books, I believe, documents that he survived several assassination attempts, and the kind of official story how he died of kind of poison, mushrooms that were spoiled, could have been the last assassination attempt that succeeded. Muhammad spent his last years in agony because of a failed assassination attempt by poisoning. Again, he challenged the existing Meccan elites. Again, you see, and the prophecies of the future Islam, the new Sharia, the kind of the future coming of the Christ consciousness or whatever, also predicts it will be challenged by the existing elites. What it means is that basically there's this dark side of human instincts for myself, my family, my clan, power, genocide, which really it takes over politics, it takes over religion. But it's basically, it is something intrinsic to who we are, is this animal nature. And the story of history has really been a battle between this dark side. Is what it is. It is our animal bestial side with this kind of influx of this perennial wisdom through the ages. Well, what the end game is that finally, at some point, the perennial wisdom will finally return and the battle will finally be won. And this is the idea of the kind of mythic quest hero restoring Camelot. It is basically the new heaven, new earth to do with prophecies. It is also the Magus manifesting the pattern of the cosmic commonwealth in a human commonwealth. Again, it's something societal. So this connects with the system change talk, the second talk. And really, it is the relating to the first talk. It is the full apocalypse, the unveiling of the hidden thing is really the full return of the perennial wisdom. Finally, you can actually say it. It's not oblique. It's not in terms of parables. When you can explicitly say what the truth is, then basically that is the basis of morality. We're not talking about a new morality. We're not talking about, Ubermensch coming up with new morality that's completely alien. It's basically reestablishing in scientific terms the basis of the original universal morality that's found in all world religion, according to the original teachers, undistorted teachings, and even in shamanistic kind of indigenous religions, it is really universal. And once you do that, then the game changes. You see, the perennial wisdom comes into the planet. And I think this really is the kind of like key to finally the perennial wisdom, I guess the Prisca Theologia, finally kind of wins this kind of cosmic battle that's been going on all through history. And finally that in our lifetimes, that this battle can finally be won, which really is the conclusion of the myth cycle and the fulfilling of the prophecies it's to their full conclusion, I believe. And connecting with the third talk, okay, the life intelligence symmetry theory, it gives a kind of like everything I said today about the causal paths and resultant paths. Ultimately, okay, enlightenment, what I've talked about, it's a mind game. You're doing something in your head. You do your behavior, your thoughts, and your emotions. There's a further kind of a clarification when we can actually reduce everything we've talked about tonight into pure neuroscience, into a kind of like really physiological understanding. So it's really kind of like these four talks, when you bring them together, it is really one message. And it really is, what's central is this idea of non-duality, the biggest truth, the biggest secret in world history, finally being revealed and finally being explained in scientific terms, then influencing political, environmental, ecological affairs, and then to establish essentially the kind of end game of I guess of what's happening. And if something drastic doesn't happen, then I think what's happening on the planet, I mean, for Christ's sake, like I grew up in the 80s, we worried about nuclear war. But now it's even closer than back in the 80s, coupled with the ecological environmental catastrophe, coupled with the collapse, the Ponzi scheme of the world economy finally collapsing. We are heading towards something like really, really quite scary. But at the same time, it is really the opportunity and it's really the backdrop for this kind of thing to emerge, I believe. So to end on an optimistic note, I think the final elaboration of this perennial wisdom for the 21st century, I think it is inevitable. And I think the conditions of the planet are making it such that it's almost as if the conditions of the planet is getting ready to receive this sort of set of ideas. And I think it's really the key to resolving the problems of this world as it has been historically, but to resolve them in a really kind of in a final, conclusive, consummatory way. Okay, so that is it. That is okay. Exactly 1 hour. Great. So that's
all right.
Any questions?
Let's give Wei a round of applause. Well done, Wei.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
yeah, well done. And a nice way to conclude this 4-part series. So yeah, we're here for at least 30 minutes. Might stay a little longer. Start popping your questions in the chat.
Oh, I see someone's written, it's wonderful to see a youngish man give such a talk. Do you know something? Do you know, I'm 52 years old and I'm 53 next month.
Mm-hmm.
No, so I dye my hair. Yeah, I dye my hair black. So it's actually, no, really, it's a stress-free life. It's really, it's really, I try to transcend my fear and desire as much as I can. So really, it's no, it's genes. Sorry, I shouldn't give myself any credit. It's all genetic. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, start popping your questions in the chat. I'll call on you in a moment. Question I have to warm you up, Wei, is I'm wondering if you can kind of hone in on the distinction of good and evil, and like just like really like hone in on that definition of like what is evil and what is good, just to kind of sense into that battle, that tension that's happening, that that you're saying the trajectory is going to be resolved soon. I know like someone like Jordan Peterson, he defines evil as like enjoying suffering for its own sake, or causing suffering and enjoying it for its own sake. So I'm curious what you think about that, and just what is your definition of the two held together?
Okay, this is quite a long answer. One way to illustrate it is basically, okay, look, if I ask you, okay, I'll admit a terrible secret. I use TikTok. Okay, I watch TikTok. And it's because my partner's younger brothers, they're very young. They were teenagers. During the lockdowns, they introduced them to TikTok, and it's really addictive. So you type in your profile, middle-aged man, 52 years old, and male, etc. And obviously they give you the dancing teenage girl, soft porn, okay. But I think I typed something like axolotls or something. I like keeping pet. I got some pet salamanders, okay. And for some reason, it knows the darkest recesses of the human mind. So it shows you these ghastly axolotls eating each other, then kind of reptiles in fish tanks eating each other. There's really horrible stuff in nature. It almost knows what people are, kind of like watch and linger on. You know what I'm saying? It predicts that basically that a male will sometimes often linger on these. Anyway, you see like you think this is evil stuff if a person did it, but it's not evil. Well, it's stuff like, like a wildebeest, literally being eaten alive. You can see the hyenas eating them. But let me ask you, are those hyenas would you call those hyenas evil? Well, I say no, they're animals. And, like chimpanzees do genocide. Is that chimpanzees being evil? What I think the evil is basically it is. I think the Bible's right that there's an awareness that to eat of the fruit in the Garden of Eden, suddenly had this awareness of knowledge of good and evil. And what it means is basically you can't say anything in the animal kingdom is evil. It's just basically human instincts. It's basically animals killing each other. Nature is really red in tooth and claw when you see these horrible TikTok videos like infanticide, horrible stuff, Now, basically, these animals are not evil, but if you imagine people doing this to each other, then that's evil. When you think about genocide, what the Nazis did, that is evil. The difference is basically we are human beings. Okay, I'm not saying anything new. I'm just basically reiterating the old wisdom, but I'm giving it kind of like a scientific angle. We are aware there's something about the human brain to do with the polar frontal. We can self-reflect. We can basically jump out of ourselves and self-reflect. That's a unique human ability. And we can basically reflect on ourselves, and then we can choose between good and evil. That's the difference. And when we have the knowledge of God, this is the thing about the Garden of Eden. You ate of the fruit, you had this experience of being God. You're not an animal anymore because you also know that you are God. Evil is basically when you have this choice of reaching for the light and divinity, and and love and God, versus the bestial realms. Basically, if you choose the bestial realms, then that is evil. If you choose the light, then that is good. And that's why William Blake, that evil is the active springing from energy, and that even evil is hell, good is heaven. What he is saying is basically these energies are basically in us all basically. The tendency to genocide is in our selfish genes. This is the work of George Price. It's not wrong, but when we realize that basically when we understand our true nature, that there really is this kind of like process to world history, attain to something higher, then we have a choice between good and evil. Do you see what I mean? Basically, if we choose the bestial, then that is evil. So psychopath, okay, you might argue a psychopath, the sociopathic genes are part of natural selection. That's what evolutionary psychologists are saying. These dark traits have been selected for. So therefore, is the psychopath killing somebody for fun, is that natural? Well, no, because he's a human being who can choose between good and evil, but he's chosen evil. So I think that's the very important distinction, I'd say.
So just to reflect that there's like two tendencies. There's the bestial one, and then there's a divine one, and we have to like honor both. But a person who's evil just chooses to stay in the bestial one. Is that would you say that's an accurate reflection?
Well, yeah. I mean, either through laziness or just through kind of like I believe this idea that like when William Blake says good is the passive submitting to reason. I believe in certain contexts, basically even a psychopath can actually understand laws, can understand rationally with the psychopath's reasoning mind not to kill people. But that person chooses then to do these bestial things based on, I guess, ignorance or whatever, then I guess that person has chosen evil. So I think it's the idea that we have this choice. We have this choice to choose between two paths where animals don't really have that. So that's what we distinguish between when we say a person is evil. Now, people do what they do, but as a society, what we do is you basically put laws in place, punishments, checks and balances in order to regulate. So I think the idea that you can educate, or at least you can correct people who commit crimes. You can basically, a person does evil things out of ignorance because they're basically uneducated, but they're correctable as long as you give them the choice and basically have the systems of checks and balances and a penal system maybe that doesn't punish people, but that really corrects people, that gives people that. But even if people choose to still live in the bestial realms, then I guess society will see that person as evil. In that person's mind, obviously we can't go into the subjective state of that person's mind. That person might feel absolutely fine about it and feel no qualms at all. But really, evil is something that you can judge in yourself if you had that ability to introspect. But there's also a judgment other people make on you. But I also accept that there are some people who just don't have that ability, and they just do what they do. The real psychopaths who are just not correctable. So I think it's, I mean, it's a complex one, but I think it is to do with the fact that this choice factor. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I might have a follow-up question on that, but let's get some other voices in here. Terry, did you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, you made two distinctions that surprised and intrigued me, Wai, and it's incredibly timely because I have a friend who's probably gone too far on the psychedelic journey and is now tempted to believe there is no difference between good and evil, to the extent that he could kill somebody just as well.
Oh dear, yeah.
And he has asked me, what is a rational argument against this position that I'm being drawn to? So I really was fascinated when you said the psychedelic path is the contractual path.
Yeah.
But the psychedelic path leads to I am God. So, which it seems to be what you're recommending is the I am God. So sort that out for me a little bit, please.
Did you know, you won't believe how heavily involved I was with the psychedelics. Sorry, I don't want to sound egotistical. There's very few people who have seen the psychedelic scene from so many different angles as myself. I spent about 3-4 years intensely in the psychedelic scene, working with probably the Timothy Leary of the London scene. He knew Timothy Leary, Terence McKenna, all these characters. I did his DJ bookings basically, and then I was played in one of the top psychedelic trance bands. I was involved. I've seen it from so many different angles. Basically, what I've seen is basically psychedelic drugs can produce states of basically glimpses of the eternal, but very often it produces demons. So I think, okay, you have this empowerment of knowing your God, but also what psychedelics do, they also shut down your brain. Okay, LSD especially is called hypofrontality. If you want to look at hypofrontality, basically just think about John Lennon. Okay, he's basically cocky, confident, really energetic guy. He takes loads of LSD, and then he becomes Yoko Ono's poodle, passive. That's hypofrontality. This is LSD bashing down your serotonin receptors, and your frontal lobes just aren't working. So sometimes you get these people who really, I was one of those people. I became a total reptile. Okay, so this is me really going through a path of destruction and having these mystic states, but then learning through, I'm not talking about good and evil as a goody-goody paragon of virtue, exemplar of good behavior. I've basically gone through the journey. I've seen, what psychedelic drugs do. My best friend died of psychedelic drugs. And what happens is basically these people become empowered, and they are fully initiated. They know their God. They've had direct experiences, but at the same time, bits of their brain are switched off. Bits of their emphatic brains are switched off, and these people become small-time cult leaders. Every psychedelic scene, I toured around the world. This band called Cosmosis, and basically every single psychedelic scene, the London scene, there were several. There are these psychedelic shaman, small-time cult leaders, who are often drug dealers, so they get very good quality drugs, and that's why they have this kind of they get followers basically, because they get the good stuff. Anyway, they can basically they deliver the goods in terms of mystical experiences, but in terms of their behavior, do you know what I'm saying? Their base is not constructive. It's not really spiritual. That I think in the psychedelic state, yes, it's very spiritual, but the psychedelic spirituality wears off when the drug wears off, and you're not basically down to your normal state. You've gone down a level, and then maybe take another dose and you've gone down a level. You've gone down a level. And before you know it, you're in your lizard brain. You're basically in the bestial mode. Yeah. So I would say basically in terms of it's very hard because some of these people have lost their minds, literally lost their minds. So I think it's a slow rehabilitatory process. And I think seriously looking back on things, it took my friend dying for me to escape that scene. I don't want to, the psychedelic scene is really important. It's been a really important part of my life. But I think I really explored it to such an extent that it took me about 3-4 years to recover from the experience. And I think really, I think if I didn't escape, okay, I wouldn't be talking such long sentences right now. I wouldn't be able to give these talks. I wouldn't have done all the, you know what I'm saying? Seriously, I think so. I think the idea that psychedelics are good because they serve as an initiation. But I think I say this to people. I say this to Alan Watts's famous dictum: when you get the message, hang up the phone. So I think the motto of the Lotus Eaters, okay, again, Oration on Dignity of Man, the wanderings of Ulysses was the encoding of magic and the mystic path. The fact is the first port of call, and the sailors get stuck on the island, they get stuck in the land of Lotus Eaters, and Odysseus has to rescue them, is the fact that, yes, it's an initiation, but if you stay in the land of Lotus Eaters, your journey is over. You don't become some enlightened being, you'll become a small-time, probably drug-dealing, psychedelic shaman, small-time cult leader, probably. So I'd say to you, advice to your friend is basically, look, there are warnings against psychedelic drugs. Basically, good is not evil. There really is. You think you're God, but unless you have this kind of like, there is a higher order and there's higher reason that William Blake talks about, then you're gonna suffer and you're gonna cause suffering. That's what I'd say to your friend. So you need morality, you need ethics basically in the psychedelic scene. But I think it's such a wild terrain that I think it's it is the wildlands of spirituality. I think. Does that make sense? Does that?
Any follow-up, Terry?
That does make sense. Yeah, I am going to share with him what you said about it shutting down aspects of the brain. So thank you for that.
You really, yeah, really. Look, seriously, I've been there. Seriously, I existed in a kind of like, okay, after I quit the psychedelic scene, I was in a mystic state for 4 or 5 months. I was in an altered state. And it literally took me years of jogging and meditation to recover from to get my strength and get my confidence back, really. But it's invaluable. I think really the path of excess does lead to wisdom if you can use it in a productive way. But more often than not, it leads to something quite detrimental, even death, as I know many people, 6 people I knew personally who died from psychedelic use, actually. Okay, so that's a bit of a warning there.
All right, always need a few warnings here at the Stoa. And Luke, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate everything that you've just shared in the synthesis. I think was beautiful. I also was interested in what you had shared with paths of contraction, not being the path forward. I think I really relate to that because I've done extended fast and psychedelics and things like that, and it does. I hear what you're saying. We live in a really complex world, and I'm wondering if you see an evolution of paths of contraction where it's not just going and fasting for 20 days or 40 days or taking a certain psychedelic. Maybe there's with our increased understanding of biochemistry and of the body and medicine and technology, maybe there's a way of that evolving. I guess that's a 2-part. Is that necessary? I guess is my other question. Is it necessary to have paths of contraction that are that work with contemporary times for leaders to lead in paths of expansion, like prophets or Jesus, whoever it is?
I think I understand what you're asking. I think to a large extent there is mixing and matching going on. What I meant was basically absolute powers of contraction, where you literally are doing those austerities. You know, Sadhu holds his hand up in the air for 20 years, it's withered into a stump. You know, you see these photographs, don't you? Or people becoming Shiva in India. India allows that, or societies in Thailand allow that to happen. There are paths of contraction where you basically, if you're expanding, okay, into life, what you want to do, you want to contract those aspects of your life which are a bit useless. So I think there is a bit of mixing and matching going on. The idea of fasting is not incompatible with, you know, this path of expansion, that we go through different phases. But what I meant was the extreme paths of contraction in order to get those mystic states, which is akin to generating a near-death experience. Basically, that's what it is, isn't it? If you know, don't eat 40 days and nights, you're close to death. So what I'd say is there are things like fasting, there are things like you know, chopping down things, simplifying your life, which is like contracting, in order to concentrate on those things which are beneficial and productive. So I think there is some mixing and matching. And I'd say, you know, I'd say psychedelic use, if you need a top up, if you know, it's very hard. I've got kids and stuff, I've got family, and I got, you know, I need to do talks. I can't do that, right? I can't do that really. And because then there's a recovery period. But I think if you need that in order to stay on a path, then you know, then fine. But I think everyone has to make their own decisions as to what they're saying. I don't want to become some kind of you know, dogmatist that this is the only way. At the end of the day, everyone is different. Everyone has to pick and choose, really. Do you know what I'm saying? Their own kind of like specific path. But I think there's certain kind of like overall arching kind of I guess frameworks to guide us. And I think what I'm saying tonight is basically, I guess, the central ideas which you can't really change, to do with good and evil, to do with ego. I didn't talk about tonight for lack of time, but ultimately, you know, the dark side is also about ego, because you know you got this animal instincts. They're all to do with self-preservation and reproduction. So ultimately, there's certain ideas that you're trying to transcend your ego. If someone's teaching you, you know, of God consciousness, and you basically, you know, you're aiming towards reinforcing your ego, then I think that is probably false, in my opinion. That ultimately what you're trying to do, you're trying to overcome yourself, overcome the world. I think these are basic truths to do, you know, with these paths. But all around that, you can really pick and choose. I think there is that kind of a process, and also experiment, I think. Does that make sense, Luke? So there's no one size fits all. I think there really is as many paths as there are people on this planet, I believe.
Yeah, it does. And I think I guess part of what I was envisioning is like I see the paths evolving constantly, and I think they both the paths of expansion and contraction need to have serious evolution based on everything else going on in the world. And I appreciated you touching on that point, because I think that's yeah, it's crucial to looking forward.
Yeah. I mean, part of the battle between good and evil is basically, I mean, if we're doing things that are causing suffering, and we know it's causing suffering, then we basically, obviously to do with the environment, you know, that basically further down the line, if we do engage in certain activities, basically they're going to cause immense suffering. We learned about, you know, these oil executives and these kind of like big corporation leaders are making decisions knowing that's going to cause global warming, knowing it's going to cause human suffering. Then obviously that's evil. When we talk about this battle between good and evil, then it's going on. It is going on in the corporate world and in society and politics. But with respect to ourselves, I mean, basically we are doing things which maybe are not necessary, which even maybe further down the line is going to cause suffering. Then these are maybe things we need to contract. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think in terms of moral ethical behavior, then yes, there is expansion along lines that are kind of ethical, productive, and useful. But I guess there's also this contracting aspect, which is contracting stuff which might hold you back in your spiritual development, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's a selective thing. Yes, it's selective atrophying and a selective growing process.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Joe, you had a question.
Yeah, I can go. First of all, thanks a lot. I've gotten a ton out of all of these talks, so I really appreciate what you're putting out there. I think where I get held up, and it's what I'm really struggling with is, and you talk a lot about Hess and Jung, and I mean, in that mythos that goes back millennia now of the overcoming of evil, you know, the hero's journey. And I'm totally on board with that. However, there is no story, like all those stories end when the hero wins that battle against evil. And so I really resonates when you talk about the potential of us in our lifetimes, sort of seeing the end of that to a degree. But what are the stories of the future? Like, do they exist yet? Are you starting to see those come about as our, you know, perspectives change, and our relationship with time and space potentially changes? And do you have a sense for these stories beginning to pop up yet?
Well, I think the myth cycle, the prophetic archetype, I think there is a fractal archetype. So I think the same storyline. Do you know? I mean, the idea that society will eventually organize itself in such a way that things are, in a sense, perfect. So the idea that, you know, biological evolution, the basic cell, it is a basic design that's replicated again and again. So evolution is going to change that. And human beings are, you know, we're functional. We can create societies, but what isn't functional? No, we've reproduced. There's 7 billion of us. There's a basic design which is quite effective. Okay, we're not perfect, but we're effective. What is not so perfect is society. So basically, I believe in the idea that eventually the cosmic battle will be won. That there is a myth cycle, this kind of recurring. In the last talk, we talked about dialectic, you know, this recurring kind of thesis, antithesis, new synthesis kind of process going again and again. We think that is the myth cycle. So the myth cycle keeps repeating: Camelot in disarray, Camelot restored, and then these Camelots converge into bigger holons, and then eventually we have this world holon now. So I think it comes to a point where this storyline comes to a point where, you know, world has become Camelot. Camelot is restored, but because the perennial wisdom is now fully emerged apocalyptically, the unveiling of the hidden thing through science, what was hidden all through the ages is now finally revealed. Then finally, on a societal level, we have this kind of like stability. Do you get what I mean? Society is arranged in such a way that basically it's now functional. All these kind of debates of right wing versus left wing, socialism versus progress versus conservatism, it's been resolved. With ideas of these spiritual ideas of perennial wisdom, but also ideas of a golden mean, reconciling all dualities. So we have this kind of political organization which can really take into account all the spectrum of behaviors and viewpoints, and it's stable. But I think the story continues once society is basically stabilized like that, and it's a functional unit. Then I think this template then explores the stars. So I think there's something about Elon Musk's life, which is like almost like mythic quest hero. He is basically, the universe is almost like conspiring to help him succeed. And I think it's part of the cosmic process that basically we will inevitably explore the stars. It's not going to be AIs going into space. It will be us, life forms, going into space. And then basically, once, you know, societies are stabilized, we've got this way of basically organizing society that is stable. We're not, you know, constantly fighting it anymore. Then the world kind of holon then explores the galaxy. But I think then the cosmic battle, the mythic archetype, will then manifest on a galactic level, and then the same cosmic battle will manifest. Do you know what I'm saying? It's the same template. Even though the kind of societal level involving human beings are stabilized, like the basic cell design is perfected, the cosmic battle, the dialectic will happen on a galactic scale. And then once that's stabilized, the holon is perfected, then it will happen on an intergalactic scale and on a cosmic scale. And then finally to perfection, the entire universe, you know, I keep saying this: cosmic Christ, celestial Buddha, universal Vishnu, perfection, the end, okay, or the beginning. Okay, but does that make sense? It's the same fractal template. So it's the same story, but it's happening on different scales.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think that that expansive mentality is helpful. I do know though, like I've been on this quest like you for like 20 years, and the people who think they must have it figured out are the ones that calcify and end up falling back. And so there's something about not thinking you've come to a conclusion that is valuable in the quest in and of itself, it seems like.
Well, yeah, I suppose you need humility. You always need to be basically ready to accept you're wrong. I think. I think in the day, but I think when you actually are using these ideas for a specific purpose, then it's not the idea that you're trying to present a set of ideas that you hope are right or wrong. You're basically trying to present a set of ideas that you think is going to serve a specific purpose. So back to the second talk, I think there really is this desire to system change. So a lot of my motivation is actually, okay, on a day-to-day level, I don't think, oh, what can I do today to further my progress to enlightenment? Okay, my life just isn't like that. I I've got kids. I've got to worry about different things. I worry about money and stuff. I've got to pay the, horrible electricity bill, cost of living crisis. But what does motivate me, I think, is how do you do system change, and how do I figure out how to do it, and also what it also motivates me is how do I create this startup at the end of time and create artificial intelligence and stuff. So I think yeah, there are ideas, but I think there are end goals that I personally have. I could be completely mistaken, but I think you just got to try your best to try and get it right, and try and if you got something you think might instigate some kind of world system change or some kind of world, then I think that's what you do. You share it with people, but you always have to accept that basically you're completely mistaken. You have to be humble, I guess. So do you know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, it is a work in progress, and I think but I think you got to dredge it. You got to basically communicate it. You got to dredge it up. You got to basically throw it out there and see if it takes hold, and watch it evolve. Watch it, open source it. Let's say.
Thank you, Joe. And that feels like a really good place to gently close this today's session in this series. But before we do, Wai, any words you'd like to leave us with here at the Stoa regarding this series, and anything maybe that's coming beyond?
No, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a real challenge to get these huge talks into 45 minutes, but it's been really beneficial because it just means it compacts, and it really actually enhances my own understanding when I actually compact the message in this way. So I think massively beneficial for me, and I hope people enjoyed it. And I think I guess I'm still a voice in the wilderness, basically. So I'm basically coming out of my voice in the wilderness phase. That's what I am. So this is basically, you give me a great context to basically present these ideas to a new audience outside my mailing list, outside my social media context. But really enjoyed it, and basically, I'll come back anytime, and basically we will continue discussion. And where we ended it, to open source it. That's what it is. It's a joint effort. It really is a joint work. And basically, I've gone through this journey to share these ideas and just throw it out there, and people will take these ideas and run with them. That's the main thing. The main thing is that you just add to the discussion, and you basically stimulate controversies. You basically open the debate, and then after that, who knows what's going to happen, really. So yeah, I mean, I think in this current context, seriously, 20 years ago when I started giving these talks and saying the prophecies are now, and we're living in the mythic archetype Camelot in disarray. 20 years later, Camelot really is in disarray, and things really do look apocalyptic in the kind of chaos, calamity sense of the word. So I think I'm just doing my little bit to try and, make the world a better place. Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for on my end, really enjoyed this series, Wai. These are like a beautiful 4-part artifacts that people can watch at their leisure anytime. And I know I'm definitely going to return to them, and so I can grok some of the stuff that's been said. And yeah, let's definitely keep the channels open between our campfires on the internet. And we'd love to have you back at the Stoa.
Fantastic. And look, there's tons of information. There's so much more. There's tons and tons of information. It's one complete worldview. So there'll be far more stuff to come in the future. So let's keep in contact, and definitely, yeah, let's Let's do it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll make some closing announcements. Our other Philosopher-in-Residence series is closing today as well. Jill Nephew, Natural Intelligence in Practice. You can check that out. That's at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And October's Philosopher-in-Residence series is Evan McMullen's returning to the Stoa. And the series is a mouthful. The Trolls Under the Bridge, Intersubjective Parasitology, Computational Demonology, and Things That Go Bump in the Dark Night of the Soul. So it's talking about demons, a theme that was touched here today. So it's a nice setup for October's series, which starts October 3rd at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So that being said, Wai, everyone, thanks so much for coming to Stoa today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.